Again, Adam Peters press conference today, 2 p.m. This is, of course, Tuesday. It's a podcast. Maybe you're listening on Wednesday, in which case it was yesterday. But Tuesday at 2 p.m., you can listen to it live on the Team 980. Logan, that leads us then to Adam Peters' next task, which is finding a head coach. And a lot of the candidates were playing this weekend, or coaching this weekend, I should say. So let's go through the playoff games and let's take a look at a couple things. How these teams were built, and if there's any of the coaching candidates that we need to talk about, let's talk about them. And the first game of the weekend is someone that I think we need to talk about. Bobby Slowick is the offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans, who thrashed the Browns 45-14. That was, whew. And I know that there's a pick six, or there was two pick sixes in this game, I think. Yeah, so it's not like the offense went out and put up 45. But still, they went out and put up a lot. They still went out and put up 31 against the defense that was supposedly the best in the NFL. And I was so impressed with what they do schematically. Like, how they run it, how they then leverage their play action fakes. Like, they do it right. And, you know, obviously Slowick is part of that 2013 Washington staff. And it was really interesting Friday on the radio. I had Nick Wagner on, the ESPN San Francisco 49ers reporter. And listening to him talk about Slowick and him covering him sounded like what I used to tell people about Sean McVay back in 2015, 2016. I think Slowick's the real deal. You played for him, so you obviously know more than me. But watching what he's done with C.J. Stroud and this offense, and hearing kind of how he is, I think he should be a real contender to be in the mix here with Ben Johnson, with Dan Quinn, with whoever else that Washington is going to interview. And I think if he's like as real deal as everyone says, who's talked to him, he's going to interview extraordinarily well, and he's going to be head coach somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, when I knew Bobby, he was 23. You know what I mean? Like, it's been a while since, and so seeing Bobby's kind of meteoric rise feels like, you know what I mean? Like, I know he's been slogging through the NFL. He worked at PFF for a little bit. Like, it's pretty fantastic. But like, let's get back to the scheme real quick. And so obviously it's Kyle's offense, but I do think it's important to know that, like, when I watch this game and when I watch Houston over the course of the season, like, CJ Stroud's impact on that team cannot be overstated. Like, the first third down they have, like, there's a free runner to the quarterback. He sits in there, finds Nico Collins for a big play. Great job. Next drive, the next big play they have almost plays exactly the same way. So, like, talking about guys elevating offenses, and the X's and O's are big elevators. And I love how they don't leverage the offensive line, but ultimately you got to get guys to go out and make plays, and I think, like, we talked about that a lot here with Sam Howell, and Sam Howell, like, how early in the season he was elevating the offense, making plays. And this is what Stroud's done for them, and when you hear D'Amico Ryans talk after the game about how much they lean on him, how much they rely on him, like, it just shows you the importance of that position. So as much as Bobby is doing tremendous stuff, and, like, you love the sequence of play, and it's, again, like, they're not doing anything unique. There are teams that run similar concepts. Like, you watch similar concepts, similar execution, but it's the players that come to life. And again, it goes back to something we talked about with the GM stuff. Like, Nico Collins develops into a true one, right? In free agency, they identify Dalton Schultz, and he comes in and has been very productive for them. Brevin Jordan, the guy that they drafted in the 5th round 3 years ago, has an explosive play for them on a nothing play. Like, talk about scheme. It's just a keeper. He's the flat control. You get the ball to him, and that's what happens when you have playmakers at different levels and the quarterback elevates. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I think Bobby deserves a lot of credit. And I think Bobby deserves probably credit in this area more than anywhere else, is the fact he was able to teach this stuff in a year is the thing that is really definitively
so
exciting.
It can be done.
Yeah, I guess so, right? And again, like, they have the quarterback in place, right? They have that ultimate piece. And I don't think anybody thought CJ Stroud was going to be this. But man, like, he does some really spectacular stuff. And he's not always on rhythm. He's not always on time. But there is a playmaking ability there that's pretty exciting, I think. And so it's the scheme. It's the fact that it was taught so well. Like, you see guys buying into the scheme, and then the elevation of the offense through young guys developing, but specifically CJ Stroud's kind of embracing this offense, and like, the drive and the hunger to be great, I guess, is pretty exciting. So.
One thing that stuck with me from the Reception Perception podcast that we did a couple weeks ago is how, Matt talked about you gotta put guys where they're great, and they when he tracks it, it's like Nico Collins, great outbreaking routes, Tank Dell, great in-breaking routes. And they have those guys run the routes that they're good at. And like that understanding of personnel, I think, is something that speaks really well to Slowick. And obviously the development of the young quarterback and the ability, whatever input he had on selecting him in the first place, I think is obviously pretty good, because they took a risk in making the trade with Arizona to take both him and Will Anderson. But also, to your point, like Orlovsky had a great line Monday on ESPN. He's like, I don't know how many dudes right now are better in the league than CJ Stroud, but it's less than his jersey number. And he wears 7. So we're talking about a top 7 quarterback easily in the NFL as a rookie. That matters a lot. But it's about, to me, the thing that I've thought about a lot too recently with like Belichick and Brady, for instance, as Belichick's career, comes, or at least his run in New England comes to an end. We'll see if his career comes to an end. But like, it's so important for a coach and a quarterback to find their muse. Like the idea that like a quarterback or a coach is just great no matter what is like, there are guys that are, right? Like Peyton Manning was going to be great pretty much wherever he went. Like he was just one of the most special prospects to ever play in the 105-year history of the league. 6'6", got a huge arm, the smartest guy to ever strap it up, right? But he finds like a great muse for this back half of his career in Denver with Adam Gase. Yeah. And Gase actually can't really work with anybody else, but that doesn't mean he wasn't good with Peyton. Right. Belichick and Brady, I think, were perfect for each other. I don't think either man is nearly as successful without the other. Would they both have won? Maybe. They're both great, but they were perfect together because they complemented each other so well. And I think that's what we're going to find out over these next couple of years, where like Slowick and Stroud, the perfect muses for each other, are they both like just dudes at their jobs? And I'm pretty sure Stroud's a dude, and he's going to be just fine with whatever offensive coordinator, especially because I think D'Amico's going to be smart enough to find someone else off the Kyle tree and try to keep some continuity there when he loses Slowick as a head coach. But I think what we're going to find out is, like, can Slowick do it without Stroud? And obviously a head coach is a different job than an offensive coordinator anyway, so there's that. But that idea of, like, is it the perfect fit, or are they both independently just phenomenal?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And again, like, you got to give Slowick some credit, like, for getting it installed. And, they don't leverage him a ton. Like, they lean on him a lot, but they do a good job of saying, hey, we've run 3 keepers. Now we're going to run Jolt, right? We're going to run Dalton Schultz on that, looks like a corner. Then he runs the post. Easy throw. Protection's easy for the O-line. Great time to call that play. We're in kind of that high strike zone area. Great job, And I think, like, that's the thing. And, like, they've done a good job of manufacturing big explosive plays. And that is a huge element to what they're doing really well. And that's schematic. That's an offensive identity thing, and they run 40, I think they ran 45 offensive plays. And, they find all these explosives. They run the ball relatively effectively. Like, there's something to that, right? There's something to saying, hey, man, we need you to be great on 20% of these offensive plays. And he does. And he did a great job of that.
And to Slowick's credit too, like, he realizes how special Stroud is. And so there's one play and maybe it is Jolt, but there's one play that I remember one of the analysts talking about where it's kind of a play action, and typically they have the guy, so like play action, you boot out to the right, and typically you have the tight end run, or the slot receiver run a corner.
It's the play. We're talking about the same play. Yeah.
Yeah, instead, because and the reason is because you want to have the receiver run to the side where the quarterback is, because it's a shorter and thus easier throw. Well, they know Stroud's got arm strength for days, so they haven't run a corner post. The safeties always jump the corner, and then all of a sudden, he's going back to the post, and Stroud has the arm strength to get it over the top. That's design. That's understanding your playmakers. That's understanding that if Case Keenum's got to get in the game, you're probably not calling that, but you can call it for CJ Stroud when your starter's in. So there's little things like that in terms of using your personnel that I think Slowick already shows obviously a great feel for, and that's a heck of a job by Houston. And no matter what happens to them next weekend, because they're going into Baltimore, and good luck with that.
It's gonna be tough.
Good luck with that. But they've already had so far and away a better season than anyone anticipated, maybe even including them. But if not, anybody but them thought. Dolphins and Chiefs. I feel so bad for the Dolphins because they are just going to get trashed by national media, and it's already started. They're soft. Miami can't go in the cold. They fell apart in December again. And it's like, they did fall apart, literally. They are
Yeah.
so banged up. Like, this is not the same team that it was in October, November. And to pretend otherwise is to be disingenuous to me. And I don't know how much more I take out of this game than that. Like, the Dolphins are understaffed by a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard a crazy statistic, and it was, what was it? It was 3-5, which is Drew Brees' road record, right, in the playoffs. And then it was 2-5, which is Peyton Manning's road record in the playoffs, right? And those are precision timing offenses led by both those guys. And that's what you want, right? You want offenses that are led in a very high level way by the best player on the field. Miami is a precision timing offense. And so I think the takeaway I have after watching that game is you don't want to play road games in the playoffs. And they had an opportunity playing the Bills the last game of the season to kind of make sure that they were in a position to play that game at home, because that's where they're built to play. They want to play in a warm environment, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like that team structure. I just mentioned two players who are Hall of Fame caliber players that were not good on the road in their whole playoff career. One of the best quarterbacks
they played
ever.
Yeah, they played in domes. I guess Peyton in Denver, but yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? Like that, and I think there's something to that. Like when you are a precision timing offense with a quarterback who doesn't have a cannon for an arm, which is a lot of quarterbacks in the NFL, this is going to be the result. I also think, you get so much from that Miami offense, elevation in terms of scheme and the run game. Sometimes I think after watching that Detroit game, sometimes you just got to line up, put your mouthpiece in and be like, hey, we're going to beat you. And I think that's something that is, again, we'll talk about that when we get to the Detroit game, but it's, you can't overvalue that kind of physical identity. You can't always find the perfect angles. You can't always find the perfect setup to maximize. And I think they do lean on that quite a bit. Miami does, and rightfully so. They got the playmakers in the scheme to get that done. But that was the thing I took away. Is like this is they're not built. Most teams are not built to play in weather games like this. And I think it's a credit to Andy Reid to kind of always keeping the ability to run the football in the bag. You always got to have it. You always got to be able to do it at a high level. Kudos to Isaiah Pacheco. Like the way he runs is perfect for that. Just violent as hell, and no one wants to tackle him and make that game feel like it's -100 because he's running so hard. So
yeah, and you always get playoff Pat too, who runs more. He only had 2 carries in the game, but he has that big 28-yard scamper.
Sure.
The other one's a 13-yarder. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has 7 carries and a 3-yard average, but they ran it 34 times.
Yeah.
Now, granted, they threw it 41. They ran a billion plays, but the other thing I think you take away is like the Chiefs are a real contender still, but it's because they have one of the best defenses in the league. Like they're so good on that side of the ball. They're physical. The Tyreek Hill getting jammed by L'Jarius Sneed where he doesn't even get off the line, and then Tyreek quote tweeting it after saying he jammed my ass to Cancun. Pretty funny. But that's who they are. And it's Chris Jones and company up front. They've got dudes who play hard as hell on the back end. Their linebackers are solid. They're just a good defensive football team.
And I think I'm glad you brought the defense up. Lots of young pieces that have developed there outside of Chris Jones. The secondary, I've heard that defense is really hard to learn. They've got the coaches in place, and we're always trying to bring it back to the Commanders, right? They've got good coaching that have developed and coached this scheme up to maximize the guys they got in the back end, right? And I think that's so important. It's like you can't rely on the big free agent splash. You got to develop guys. And I think that defense is a perfect understanding of developing guys. And look at the leading receiver, I think, for Kansas City is a rookie, right?
Yeah, Rashee Rice, yeah.
Like getting a rookie player in there to make plays for you, it's a big deal. And I think you saw it with Houston, you're seeing it with Kansas City. One of the kind of the perennial powerhouses is youth development on a roster. And it's,
And you think of Spags over the years, by the way. Like, think about what he did internally with the guys he developed in New York back in the day.
Right.
Osi Umenyiora, Justin Tux. Like, those guys were all in-house.
Yeah. And I think, we didn't even mention, the linebacker for Houston who had the 2 pick sixes. Like, he was a developmental linebacker that has now developed, and he's making a ton of plays for you. So it shows you just how important, if you want to make a playoff contending team, it's not just talent acquisition, it's talent development, and then teaching that talent how to execute in that scheme, which I think is Kansas City's defense is the perfect model for that.
Yeah, talking about Christian Harris had one of the pick sixes, and Steven Nelson had the other one, the DB. But I think Harris was had the pressure on that play or something like that.
He had a sack, He had a great game. But again, a developmental guy that no one was sure how he'd pan out. But you get D'Amico Ryans with him and a good defensive staff, and you get something better, which I think, again, in the context of the Commanders, this GM hire is a big deal, right? Adam
Yeah.
Peters is a big deal, but it's the next couple hires are going to be huge. So
Of course.
and sorry to cut you off, but Scott Pioli
Yeah.
on that when he called in said understanding that it's the coach's team is
Yes.
something that you see here as well too. So
For sure. Same thing in Green Bay, by the way. They realize that Matt LaFleur is that dude, and he has built an incredible team.
Yeah.
48-32, the final score. Dallas Dak was awful early in this game. The defense was awful early in this game. And really, the defense never got better. Dak got a lot better. Dak's second half was pretty impressive, actually. It's not going to help him in terms of the narrative case, nor is it going to help the $59 million cap hit that he is set to incur for them next season. And they'll, I'm sure, try to work on a restructure or something. But McCarthy's job up in the air for sure. I think part of the reason it was up in the air is because Jerry Jones really doesn't want to lose Dan Quinn to be a head coach somewhere else. Now it's like, well, do we want to really replace Mike McCarthy with Dan Quinn, whose defense just gave up 48 points in a playoff game? That's a yikes, man. What did you see in this one?
So I think the thing that stuck out to me just rewatching it this morning was just, how good Love was. And again, Love in specific situations. And again, he sat for a year. He developed. We're going to say this word ad nauseum. Got to develop guys, right? But a couple of their biggest plays early in the game are off schedule. Him just buying a little time. This vaunted pass rush of the Dallas Cowboys wins. He buys a little time, makes the guy miss. Bits a huge completion on third down. That's 2 consecutive third downs he does that on. So obviously there's the X's and O's. There's this Kyle Shanahan offense that I think Matt LaFleur does an excellent job of executing, right? But it's also getting those guys like the Jimmies and Joes, right? It's so important. And they talk about developing young talent. They are
They're the youngest team in the league.
2 rookie tight ends, young receivers, like all of them are under like 23 years old. It's crazy to look at. Insulating the offensive line, leaning on Aaron Jones when you have to. Great job. And then defensively, just again, they have young pieces that have stepped up in the playoff game, and give credit to who you want there. But I think when you look at these, and the other thing about that Green Bay team is there were a lot of different targets. There's a lot of different targets in the Houston game. There's a lot of different targets offensively that they can go to. And when you compare that to the Dallas Cowboys, right, with CeeDee Lamb, who is a little bit off, right? That connection, which has been so good for them, is a little bit off early in the game. And all of a sudden the offense looks terrible, like lean on other people. And I think that's what not having a true one in Green Bay forced Jordan Love to do a little bit, was like, hey, I got to distribute the ball. And in this game, it was extremely important and extremely powerful because it led to a very productive offensive day for them. So.
Yeah. Do you think that was it for McCarthy in Dallas?
I don't know.
Let me ask you this. This is a better question. Would you, they've won 12 games 3 straight years and can't win in the playoffs. To me, I'm like, I'd rather take my chances with someone who's consistently winning 12 games. I think the team was better this year than they were in the previous couple of years. I think McCarthy unlocked Dak at a new level. They got to figure out the playoff thing, but I would not move on. I would try to be like, you know what? We're going to play the continuity game here. And some stability. But Jerry Jones and I are very different people.
I probably agree with that. I think those 12 wins are really hard to come by. I just think it's also, this is where having a GM and coach conversation would be really important to me. And so what I mean by that is when you look at when Dak's not going well, can you run the ball? And they can't, right? What are your other options? And I think, Detroit, LA, there were moments in that game where Matthew Stafford, despite his greatness, struggling, and they ran the ball really effectively, right? Same thing with Detroit, right? Same thing with Houston. All these games where Green Bay ran the ball when they had to run the ball, and having that as a piece of your identity, right? And so, I heard something on a podcast yesterday talking about how, not having that kind of bruising, imposing Zeke Elliott type runner negatively affects them offensively. And I think kind of saying, hey, is there somebody we can bring in? Maybe it's Derrick Henry that lets us stay efficient when we got to have it. It's a conversation that, again, the GM and the coach have to have and say, this is an area where we're weak. We have to kind of prepare for these contingencies. But I do agree, Mike McCarthy seems like the guy that you would bet on. It's hard to win 12 games in the NFL. Now you got to win playoff games. But I think this is a personnel, Jimmy's and Joe's talent development situation, again, for them, where they don't have anybody outside of CeeDee Lamb. Really, they have people on the roster, but no one that Dak felt comfortable going to. Obviously, Ferguson late in that game.
Yeah.
But I think that's something I would look at is like, what are some other ways we can win football games if Dak's not playing at an MVP caliber level?
Right. I do think though, if they do move on, Belichick becomes real interesting there.
Oh,
Like
I
that is
bet.
one of the fits where I'm actually like, no, that'd be a good idea.
Yeah.
Because the roster is built. And
Right.
obviously that's been the problem for Belichick the last couple of years. All right. Rams Lions. This is probably game of the weekend. This
Dude,
one was
so good.
phenomenal football game. Super stressful. But the Lions, I mean, really this comes down to the Lions converted in the red zone. The Rams didn't. That's the
Right.
football game.
No, 100%.
And defensively, they stood up when they had to. But you see that red zone execution, like a lot of that is real. And this is red. Like I think offensive coordinating matters in the red zone more than anywhere else on the field because you have to create in a way that you can just
Correct.
kind of rely on the space and guys to win in other areas of the field. And Ben Johnson put on a clinic down there in the red zone in 24-23. They ultimately get it done.
I totally agree. I think that's the main point of the game. But I think you just see Ben Johnson, obviously a guy on the candidate list here, or at least been reported on the candidate list here. And I think the thing I took away from that game, from his perspective, is man, that roster, that offense is good. Man, that offense has a lot of pieces. Offensive line, they're excellent. Running back, excellent. Receivers, some guys have come along, and I think that is the scheme elevation. But Sam Laporta, excellent, right? Amon-Ra St. Brown, just excellent, and I think like that, when you're building a team like Detroit, and obviously Dan Campbell and the GM there worked really hard on that.
Yeah,
like
Brad Holmes, shout out to him.
I don't care how good of a coach you are, you got to get the talent in place. And I think to your point, like Johnson deserves a ton of credit. Dan Quinn deserves a ton of credit. Dan Campbell, deserves a ton of credit. Like they're in the low red. It's 4th and 1. They throw a pass to Sam Laporta for a touchdown in a man
That
situation.
play is so cool. Like
Yeah.
they find a way with motion or with like a little shift in personnel to get a guy who has no business being in coverage on Sam Laporta.
Yeah, and it's easy. Yeah, and
it's stealing.
And I think like it's part of, again, like your identity and playing against expectations. Like I think everybody expects them to run the football down there. And
Right.
they're like, nope, we're going to shift to this. We're going to get in a bunch with our tight ends who, again, great job in talent acquisition, finding guys that can win in one-on-one situations at a high level. And that you find good matchups that way. And again, that's talent, that's coaching, that's getting that dude who is an excellent football player in Sam Laporta. So, and I even think about Gibbs. Like we can't like leave this game not talk about Gibbs. Like there's a couple checkdowns in this game where it's a 5-yard nothing play. He turns it into an 18-yard, 15-yard explosive first down, keeping the offense on schedule. And so like while that decision was much maligned, like he's a good football player that elevates that offense.
But they knew what they wanted, and I think that's like they knew what they needed, and I think that's the overall takeaway when we talk about Peters and the next head coach, and like what Pioli said to me last week in terms of do you have that fit and that understanding between front office and talent acquisition and coach is like, do you know what you need? They needed that player. They needed Jahmyr Gibbs, and they went out and got him. They knew they needed Sam Laporta. They went out and got him. They're not just like, who's the best player available on Mel Kiper's board or on our own board. It's like, we're building a board to make sure that we get the dudes that we want. And we've got these things in place and we need this other thing. But it's for them, the thing that I think is common with a lot of these teams is like they started on the O-line. They have at least, I feel like a lot of these teams also have like at least one elite offensive lineman, and that helps the rest of your guys a lot. Like there's Laramie Tunzel in Houston,
played great.
Penei Sewell in Detroit. Like if you can have one, it makes the other four's job a lot easier. I mean, that was for years here. Like I really don't know how great, like obviously Sheriff was great. Morgan, when he was healthy, was really good. But like having Trent as the anchor on that left side, it made everyone else's job so much easier. And I think that is something that we're going to do like a how they built it podcast kind of, if you will. NPR, don't come after us for the trademark on the how they built it, but like how they built it contender edition next week when we're down to 4 teams. And I wonder how many of those teams wind up with that. Like they have one all pro level offensive lineman who makes everyone else's job way easier.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea because I think like when you look at Houston's O-line, it's not like, oh my gosh, they've got 5 murderers. They've got Laramie Tunsil, who's maybe the best pass protecting left tackle in football. I'm not the best tackle, but he's very good at that one thing. He takes Myles Garrett out of the game with an excellent performance and deserves so much credit. But it helps those other guys kind of settle in, find good matchups. You get a bunch of double teams over there, which is awesome. So, yeah, man. And I think, Sean McVay, ton of credit. And you talk about talent acquisition and identifying guys. Like, I'm sure everyone's seen that thing about Puka Nacua, right?
Yeah, that was incredible. The video
where it's like his vision for that player was so strong. And now he probably didn't think he's going to, break all these rookie records, but
right.
Like, and again, like I was listening to something the other day where it's like the reason you get excited if you're the Commanders about Adam Peters is he's worked with Kyle, who has a very clear vision of what he wants and what he needs for an offense. And you see that also with Sean, right? And all of the people that come off of his tree, he's got a very clear vision of the type of skill set that he wants and is valuable in that system. And then now you, as the talent evaluator, can go out and say, I think this guy does it the best. Player X, who's going to be a 4th round pick, does it the best. Let's target that guy in that round and make sure we make that happen for our head coach. So I think that's where again, like with Kyle, Puka Nacua, or not Puka Nacua, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, guys. George Kittle's a 4th round pick, like guys that again fit what you need offensively, and it makes a better product. And I think, like, again, Sean, his relationship with the GM there, you see that's a young team. It's a very young roster, but they have an elite, like Matt Stafford is amazing. Like watching him is awesome, very good at football. And then all the young pieces that they've identified and inserted and got growth from. And I think that's again, like what makes that so impressive. And it feels like a very common theme. A lot of offensive playmakers, right? A lot of different ways for those winning sides. Guys have developed and a very clear vision of what we need. Like think about like Sam Laporta, tough, hardworking, loves football. Like could that be more of a Detroit player? And then that's all the guys on that offense, right? They've very clear vision there too. So
no doubt. All right, Steelers and Bills. I don't think there's a ton to talk about here. Like Steelers, they're especially without TJ Watt, like they didn't have a chance.
Right.
Elite players matter a lot, and TJ Watt, their record with and without him is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
We'll obviously see what happens with Tomlin, because if Tomlin becomes available, you bet your bottom dollar that the Commanders are going to want to talk to him.
Yeah.
So we'll see on that. And then Eagles and Buccaneers. Man, I know you want to talk about the Eagles and what fell apart there. Shout out to the Bucks playing well and Canellis and that offense doing great things. But for Philadelphia, just a sad end. Jason Kelce retiring. Like this is the end of an era in Philadelphia in some ways. We'll see how they can replace him, and they still will have the rest of that O-line. But I mean, no AJ Brown. Jalen just did not look good in the latter half of the season. Like I'd be nervous if I was in Philly with him. Which I hate because he seems like an A+ dude, but it's not pretty. And that defense was something even worse than that. That defense was horrendous the last 7 weeks of the season. And if Sirianni keeps his job, he's going to have new coordinators probably for the second straight year. Put it that way. But what do you take out of Philly's collapse?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing, and we've talked about this off air quite a bit, and so I think the thing that people forget about Philly is they lost both their coordinators, and coaching is important in maximizing talent. Like it just is. And I think I look at how they changed from last year to this year, specifically offensively. And to me, that regression, I don't want to say was inevitable, but it felt like it was always just around the corner next game. Like it never was super clean early in the season, and Jalen Hurts was playing out of his mind. And so the second there's a little bit of a hiccup from him, right? The second teams kind of figure out the patterns a little bit better. Like there was just nowhere to go with the football. And so much of what they did last year was built on kind of this principle that you see with San Fran. We're going to run the ball. We're going to get simple coverage structures. We're going to really lean on the best position group on the field, which is the offensive line. And that's what we're going to do. And I think there was a departure from that, with the new OC. And Gannon, I think his departure is significant. Like that defense was never super dynamic, right? They were very kind of solid and straightforward, but obviously he was coaching it at a very high level to maximize those guys. So, it's looking at it from a Commander's perspective, it just shows you like you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't have the coaches that are putting those guys in the right situations to be successful and continuing to foster that growth from those players, you're going to see a pretty heavy duty regression. And there are very few players that are scheme proof, that are coaching proof. And what I mean by that is like, Trent Williams can play in outside zones, gap scheme, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's what makes him him, right? But Tyler Columbus, who shout out to 2012, was excellent in that kind of zone read, heavy play action pass system, but couldn't do it in other systems because like he was insulated in this very specific way in that system. So I look at that and I kind of say like that's what you're seeing here is guys leaving what was working, not developing the talent in a safe environment, much like Baltimore did with Lamar Jackson. Like they stayed with Roman for a little bit longer than I think a lot of people wanted. I think to make sure that he was ready to go, Lamar Jackson, and then now Lamar's Lamar. And I think they thought Hurts was maybe a little bit accelerated. They changed their offensive identity, and to me, this is the result. Yeah, this is the result.
Yeah, I just stick with what works. Don't overthink it. That's where football coaches get themselves in trouble all the time, and certainly this is an example of that. And we'll see just how much trouble. You could wind up, depending on what happens in Pittsburgh, Dallas, Philly, you could wind up with as many job openings basically from playoff teams as you did in the immediate aftermath of the season. I guess some of them stacked up eventually, and obviously there's ultimately 8 with some of the ones that opened during the season as well. But you could have a ton of openings. So we'll see with how that goes. And obviously that's a big deal for Washington because that's going to affect the market of where these top guys want to go. But right now, Washington, I think, is the best job available. And we'll see if that is true by, this afternoon when some of the owners in some of these places or whatever Tomlin wants to do, figure out that future. All right. Again, Adam Peters press conference, 2:00 today on 106.7 The Fan and the Team 980. Reaction from me on the radio at 4. We'll probably talk a little bit about it on the second pod this week as well. This week is still a little crazy with the schedule because of the holiday, but our plan moving forward for the offseason, record on Mondays and Wednesdays, release Tuesday, Thursday mornings. Sometimes, if there's stuff that's happening, you might do a bonus pod. So make sure that you're subscribed to not miss anything that we do here at Take Command. That'll do for our show today. For Logan Paulson, I am Craig Hoffman, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 106.7 The Fan's YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.